taking last year's family car and reducing its weight with a blowtorch and shears. Cutting $2 billion from this vehicle does not make it a compact, it makes it a wreck. This, in my mind, this is a very important statement in the fact that when you take a look at a budget and you start, say, let's use the state for example, start whittling away at it, what are you left with? Are you able to achieve goals that you may have externally with a reduced budget that say you're going to cut 10% across the board? What are you left with? What's the true price of delivering that service now? Some of the budget magic we used in the past is no longer available to us. There's 7 things of many that can be used, and at some length they may be used in the future. But these 7 things aren't techniques that are going to be sustainable throughout the future of what you're trying to achieve within the city of Gardner. We have shifted funds from other accounts, borrowed. Pensions are now a nationwide issue is in the state of Kansas as well. Temporary cost cuts are freezing in vacancies. Now we're talking about doing more with less. How are you going to achieve some of the goals that you've got set with less staff? So if these 7 things aren't available, what is available? Priority-based budgeting types. There's really 4 types of these priority-based budgeting. Political is more individualistic. There's personalities obviously involved or program popularity. Across the board cuts, we've seen a lot of this. This is really more of the easy discussion from kicking a budget off. Everybody does less on an equal basis, which means all programs get cut. And then everything's a priority, obviously. Rule-based is let somebody else do it. It only fund what the law allows, and everything else falls through the cracks. What we've come to, though, what's left, is the outcomes. What's most effective at meeting citizen expectation. This outcome really shifts the perspective on this next slide. It shifts the perspective from an internal organizational imperatives to community needs and priorities. So the focus instead of internal becomes one of external importance. So what are we trying to achieve with that budget? What are we trying to achieve with the resources that we have available, whether they're dollars or people? That discussion becomes external. Emphasis on inputs, the shift is from emphasis on inputs to one of objectives and outcomes. If you've got a set number of FTEs and a set number of dollars, you're going to talk to your professional staff about what is it that you're able to achieve, what strategies. Let's talk about strategies for road maintenance. We've only got a set number of dollars, but as governing body, you're going to want to see certain things happen. Great. Now let's talk to this professional staff about how do we achieve those. We know that cost, you can't affect the cost of a certain process, but you can affect the difference in the processes you use to achieve those goals. Establishing priorities. That's what priority-based budgeting is all about. It's establishing those priorities and aligning those resources to those priorities to address those important issues first. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a minute. It also integrates a system. It's an entire system, not something you pick up off the shelf on a summer basis and do and then put away. It's something that continually happens. It's that continuous improvement program. A lot of planning involved. The budgeting is actually the budget itself is probably the least important document. It's going to be about the discussion on what those tactics are when you start talking about some of the goals that you have. Additional characteristics. There's a logic flow from what you set as objectives to the plan strategies, the link of the financial goals and long-range plans with performance or operational goals. And when it says performance, we're not talking about employee performance. We're talking about the program performance. Is it performing the way it was expected to the year before when you started that discussion? What changes need to be made? The budget becomes a tool for monitoring instead of controlling the performance. Those who have the dollars aren't necessarily the ones with the highest level of programs or priorities. Some of the things we've learned about doing the priority-based budgeting, and this has been in place for some time. It begins with planning. long-term planning, short-term planning, as most budgets do. Politics always is involved in this process. You can't ever count that out. Politics on an internal basis and an external basis, your constituents as well. Prior decisions, when you make those decisions, obviously when you make those decisions, we continue to have to supply or work toward those outcomes that the decision's been made. Financial forecasts are always involved, and there's always invariably going to be fiscal constraints. The budget is the final page in the strategic plan. We'll talk a little bit more about what that strategic plan might look like. Priority-based budgeting is a process. It's not a result itself. And when we talk about priority-based budgeting, again, it's about establishing the goals, communicating objectives from a staff point to the goals, to the elected officials. It's a continuous improvement process. But given that, what about the budget roles? Obviously, budget preparation is the responsibility of the finance of the budget office. The city administrator or city management is typically the ones that present the budget to the city, elected officials. Now, the new role for departments, instead of reacting to a cost cut or a measure that says you don't have as much dollars as you did before, tell me what that impact is. What we're really talking about is taking the professional staff, the department heads, and talking about what those strategies that are going to achieve the objectives and the goals might look like. So public safety may be just fine. It may be something that, if they roll the budget over and we're good to go, we don't really need to talk about that. Maybe infrastructure is something we need to talk about at length. Let's talk about some of the tactics we can use for maintenance on infrastructure. And that may be the key discussion you have during a budget session. There's things that pop up that are strategies, that becomes more about the strategies and tactics. They also decide, and again, departments are the experts. They're the individuals that actually communicate with you as a governing body what fits and what doesn't fit, what works and what doesn't work. And this is information that maybe you have or you don't have. You can start that discussion, that dialogue about what those tactics might look like. They also establish those clear links between goals all the way down into the programs. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Budget adoption, this is probably no news for you guys. Full governing body approval, and within the state of Kansas, obviously, we work toward an August 25th deadline, which really means that the forecast you're working off of is probably in April or May toward 2014, so you're making decisions in the summertime for things that take place a full 12 months from now. Now, given that, what is it, after putting all this together, after putting outcomes together, after putting the staff in place, what you need, we can look at a cycle similar to this. The National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting, their best practices start with where you guys are in number one. Establish broad goals to guide decision making. So the input you give to staff as far as what the budget ought to consider really starts here. 2, 3, and 4, really 2 and 3 are on a staff level. They develop approaches to achieve those goals, come back, communicate what those approaches might look like. Again, that's really what we're talking about in a budget process. So when, as staff reapproaches you during the summertime, we're talking about, okay, here's the goal. What is it that you're going to do, or how is it that you're going to do achieve those goals? And is it a short-term or a long-term goal? Sometimes it may be 3 to 5 years away. But those approaches get developed by staff. And then as that discussion takes place and the tactics are agreed upon, those budgets get developed that are consistent. So what does this budget anticipate as far as an approach to achievement of a certain goal? Put a slightly different way, we're talking about 1, 2, and 3, and what we're really going to focus on here in a minute is that. Stakeholder input. You've got a great survey in place, the Direction Finder survey, that gives you extensive information about what citizens' perspective is and what priorities they see. And ETC will tell you it's statistically valid information that would give you their perspective on